Welcome to this new automotive news video, the one for March 2nd, 2026, the first of this month. Since yesterday, I released a special edition about the fall of Maserati. I invite you to go watch that video. If you haven't already, since it has a lot of important info, I'll add the link in a pinned comment. Today, we're going to talk about just one topic because there's a lot to say. We're going to talk about the French car market. In fact, we have the numbers for February 2026, and they're catastrophic. It was a real black hole. It's a rare double-digit drop in registrations in modern French automotive history. So today I'm going to share with you in this video all the key figures to remember about this month of February 2026. And we'll try to explain a bit why and how we got to this point. I hope this single topic video will interest you. Tomorrow we'll meet again for some more varied news, I hope, with news that's a bit more positive than what we're going to talk about today. In the meantime, if you enjoyed today's video, feel free to show it by leaving a like, subscribing for future videos, and clicking the boost button. That's really the most important thing if you want to support my channel and if you appreciate my work. And of course, leave a comment where you can share your thoughts on today's news and where you can also share your own experiences. Perhaps you're among the French who got a new car in February 2026 or recently ordered one. If so, mention the model and engine type. And on the other hand, if you're one of the French people who postponed their purchase, don't hesitate to explain why you still haven't bought your new car. So, as I was saying, February 2026 was a real black hole for the French car market. A double-digit drop in registrations, that's a 14.7% decrease that was recorded. Something almost never seen in the history of modern automobiles. These are the worst numbers recorded since the COVID period. In fact, you have to go back to the 2012 crisis almost 15 years ago to see numbers this bad. One detail, though, is that back in 2012 and 2013, it was a bit unprecedented. But now, since 2020, things have been bad every year. So that's minus 15% on a market that's already much smaller compared to 2012. Unfortunately, 2026 is starting off particularly badly. Let me remind you that in January, it was down 6.5% compared to January 2025. And so far, January plus February, it's an overall drop of 11% compared to the same period in 2025. So things are going badly. By the way, as the PFA, which is the automotive platform, pointed out, it's the organization that compiles the data we're going to talk about today. We've reached a historically low level, which is even 30% lower than what we saw in 2019. That was the last real normal year, let's say, before COVID. That's 120,000 cars that have been registered in France since the beginning of the year, and all distribution channels are showing negative numbers. For example, among private individuals, people like you and me who are going to change cars, it's down 15.4%. On the business client side, so companies that buy cars, that's one of the biggest drops, and it's a huge problem. It's down 18.3%, and it's a particularly big problem. Because in general, it's thanks to company fleets that the overall French car fleet doesn't age too much. Companies are normally supposed to renew their car fleets much more frequently. And what's good is that, in general, all these cars that are only 3, 4, or 5 years old end up on the used car market. This allows average French people, regular individuals, to buy a relatively recent car that's much cheaper than at dealerships. And this helps to at least maintain a minimum level of renewal in the French car fleet, which is now only getting older. I should remind you that the average age of a car in France is 12.5 years. And it's going to get even worse, even faster, with these company cars that aren't being renewed. For lease-to-own and long-term rentals, it's negative 9.4%. And for short-term rentals, all the Hertz, the Avis, where you go to rent a car temporarily, it's minus 22.5%. And when it comes to demonstration vehicles, or all the cars that are displayed in showrooms, which are there for customers to come and test drive, it's negative 2.3, a much smaller decrease because for several years now, dealerships have been registering a lot of cars. To try to sweep things under the rug a bit and make their situation look a little better on paper, some brands are clearly doing better than others. For example, Skoda achieved plus 5.9, Tesla plus 55%. But after 2025, that was particularly bad. So they're starting from a very low point, and it's very easy when you start from very low to have very large percentages. It's the same for Lancia, plus 50%. On the automotive group side, Stellantis is at minus 7.3. So technically, they're doing a bit better, since they're doing less badly than the rest of the market average. Even though its main brand in France, Peugeot, has dropped by 20.7%. There's one for whom the problems are much more serious, and that's the Renault group. In February 2026, it's minus 18% for the group, with Renault, the brand, down by minus 16.5%, and Alpine by minus 37.2%. But those are small volumes, so let's say we don't really care. Where it's more serious, though, is Dacia, which is down by minus 36.3%. By the way, I made a video on the subject a few days ago, which I invite you to check out. We were expecting some pretty bad numbers from Dacia for two reasons. First, because there are new engines coming out, so some customers are simply waiting for these new cars to arrive before buying a new model from Dacia. But also because Dacia has become more expensive in terms of pricing over the past few years. And Dacia, which may have found the right balance between 2020 and 2023 in terms of moving up market and displayed prices, has now crossed a line where Dacia has simply become too expensive compared to the image it projects. By the way, if we look more closely at Renault's numbers, we can see that there are quite a few things that aren't going very well for them, like the fact that they're falling even further behind. This month, for example, by Peugeot. In the French top 10, the Clio 5 is in second place, but it's falling further and further behind the 208, which has pulled even further ahead. And then sales of the Clio 6 aren't taking off yet. They sold 2,800 units in January, and in February, it's 2,500. And you have to combine the sales of the Clio 5 and the Clio 6 to be roughly at the same level as the sales of the Peugeot 208. By the way, another blow for Renault regarding the electric car market. It's Renault 5, which had managed to reach the top spot in the electric car sales ranking in France, is now topped by Tesla, whose model has taken back the #1 spot. This is the first time since the launch of the Renault 5 in 2025, which until now had actually been selling pretty well. By the way, you should know that in France, in February, 20.627% of the cars that were registered were electric cars. That's a clear increase in market share compared to February 2025, when it only accounted for 18%. So let's say less than one sale out of 5, whereas now we're between 1 out of 4 and 1 out of 3. But it's a slight decrease compared to January 2026, when it reached the record of 28. And according to the PFA, we shouldn't be too happy about this 27% because it's 27% of a market that's declining by 14% compared to February 2025. And that's especially according to the PFA. These are still cars that come from the social leasing program. Cars that were ordered in 2025 in September, October, November, December, which are only arriving now and which, in a way, distort the figures we have here. It's a safe bet that if we counted sales instead of registrations, we would have reached a much higher record in November and December. Maybe over 30%. But in February and January, we already dropped below the 25% mark, maybe even below 20%. According to the PFA, electric cars still haven't managed to create a natural sales momentum and still depend heavily on subsidies. By the way, let me add a little news update about electric cars and their subsidies. According to a study by the SDES, the Statistical Service of the Ministries of Transport and Energy, 83% of electric cars registered in 2024. That's a little while ago, but still, it wasn't that long ago. 83% of those registered cars had been subsidized in one way or another. If the SDES did the same study in 2025, it would probably be a little less, but still. For now, electric cars are mainly selling thanks to subsidies. On the internal combustion car side, things aren't going well either. Pure gasoline cars now only make up 15% of the market share, and diesel just 3%. And the type of engine that's been at the top for a while now, it's hybrid cars, which now make up 53% of the market. Of course, in a few moments, we'll talk about the numbers for the used car market, which are a bit mechanical, but they're not good either. But just before that, how did we get here? The first reason is that the purchasing power of the French is under more and more pressure. Everything costs more, so naturally people have less money to spend on replacing their cars, which makes perfect sense. Another reason is that cars are already expensive and prices keep rising. Let me remind you that in 2026, the average price of a new car is 36,000 euros compared to about 25,000 before COVID. That's an increase of 10,000 euros in 5 or 6 years. And thirdly, there's taxation. Surprise! Electric cars don't work for everyone. Some people prefer new gas-powered or hybrid cars, except that with completely outrageous penalties, sometimes you could afford the car, but you can't pay the penalty that comes with it. So, well, you just don't buy a car and you keep your old car for longer. Or you turn to the used car market, and actually, we're going to talk a bit about the used car market. The used car market is doing much better than the new car market, even though it's still in the negative. That's a decrease of 0.1% compared to February 2025. As usual, the most sought-after engine type is diesel, which accounts for 43% of transactions in the used car market. The newest cars are the ones that have the hardest time finding buyers. For example, in the category of cars that are 2 to 5 years old, it's almost a 10% decrease. Cars that are 6 to 10 years old accounted for 20% of the market. Cars that are 16 years old and older have seen a clear increase of more than 10% and now represent almost 30% of the used car market. And I'll give you one last piece of information that I always find quite amusing. Electric cars make up 4% of the used car market. Well, that should grow in the coming years, but for now, we're still between 3 and 4%. And contrary to what you might think, the best-selling electric car on the used market isn't a Tesla or even a recent electric car. But it's actually the Zoe from Renault, a model that's now almost 15 years old. So it's still quite a unique market. Hopefully, March 2026 will manage to turn things around a bit. But there's still a good chance that 2026 will end up in the red compared to 2025. And honestly, pretty deep in the red. There's no reason for things to suddenly get much better. Unless, all of a sudden, the government decided to suspend the penalty or the European Commission decided to relax the safety standards for their cars. If there was less electronics, which could greatly lower their prices and maybe boost sales a bit. Both scenarios are very unlikely to happen. So, as you can see, things probably won't get better in the coming months. There you go, we've covered today's news, or at least the topic of this one. We'll meet again tomorrow for some more varied news. Meanwhile, you can like this video, subscribe for future ones, or support us by clicking the join button below. It starts at 99 cents a month and really helps my channel. Thanks to those who check it out. See you in the next video. Ciao.